Please proceed, sir.
Okay, good afternoon. My name is Dr. Shiva Byedone. One of my expertise is in the field called pattern recognition and mathematical analysis, so I'll try to keep it brief. But 49.8% went to Biden and 47.6% to President Trump. So that was the reported results from the Secretary of State. Literally taking all the data provided by the Secretary of State across the 743 precincts in Maricopa County, and we're literally recreating the election. And there are two curves here. One is the curve for President Trump, which is a red curve, and the blue curve is the curve for Mr. Biden. And as we move from left to right, what we're doing is we're starting with precincts which have low number of votes to precincts which have high number of votes, and we're literally counting the vote totals and summing them up together. When you get to the end here, you get the actual election results. So 49% for Mr. Biden and 47.6% for Mr. Trump. So these curves in many ways show the dynamic of the election as you move from the precincts from low vote counts to high, and you're essentially adding them up. So what we wanted to do was we wanted to see if we can reproduce the curve for President Trump and the curve for Mr. Biden by looking at the demographic of voters based on party affiliation, because that's one of the most easily accessible, or one of the most prominent features in an election. So in summary, for Republicans, where the percent turnout positively correlates with percentage registered Republicans in a precincts, for Democrats and independents, the percent turnout negatively correlates with percent registered Democrats and percent registered independents in precincts. So that's just giving you the feature of what was taking place in Maricopa County. And I want everyone to look at this carefully. So out of all the potential universe, which we've done, and we're going to continue doing this, by no means is this done, we find that the interesting possibility we find here is when the Democrat percentage is 130% Mr. Biden and negative 30% Mr. Trump, and the Republican percentage is 0, 100, the independent is 30%, 58%, libertarian 0, 60, 60, 0. But what's extraordinary about this graph, again, we went through many iterations, it matches perfectly, near perfectly. The slopes match, the curves match, the shape match. So what this tells us is that this demographic distribution of allocation of party affiliations is what can generate this. And I find it highly implausible, because this means that Mr. Biden got 130% of Democrat voters and negative 30%, and President Trump got negative 30%. So how is this possible? We need to do more research. One is, again, as I mentioned, that there could be certain groups of independent voters that are not visible in the model, or it could be vote swapping, or all three. And I'll end on that. Well, this is a curve that represents the actual vote, what's called the cumulative vote count for Mr. Biden and President Trump. Okay, so this is the control. This is what actually occurred on election night. Does that make sense? And what we're attempting to do in mathematics, using mathematics, you can do what's called curve fitting, where you can change certain variables to attempt to fit this curve. The variables we are changing here, which cannot be done, manually, but the computer is essentially changing the possibilities of different levers, a percentage of Democrats who voted for President Trump, the percent of Democrats who voted for Mr. Biden, the percent of Republicans who voted for Biden, the percent of Republicans who voted for Trump, the percent of independents who voted for Biden, the percent of independents who voted for Trump, and so on. So it's a solving where, remember in algebra where you could multiply variables by different equations, and you're trying to match this curve. So the computer is doing this, Mayor Giuliani, and so that's why I'm showing you this different possibilities. Now there's hundreds of thousands that the computer is running through to figure out what possible, as you can see here, what possible combination of these would lead to this. And the only one we were able to find was this. I hope that explains it. We're looking at the computer trying to find combinations of these vote allocations that could perfectly reproduce this result.
So a vote for Biden would actually be 1 1/3 vote. Is that correct?
Yeah, 1 3/10, right. So
1
so when
3/10.
Biden got one vote,
1 3/10, and a vote for
Yeah.
Trump would be 1.
a vote for Trump would be whatever the president got, if he got 100 votes, reduced by 30% of what Mr. Biden got. Basically, the president's vote is linked to the vote that Mr. Biden got. So if Biden got 100 votes and his went up by 1.3, which means it took 30% of the votes were reduced that would go to President Trump. So basically, votes are being eaten from President Trump and handed over to Mr. Biden. That's the only way to, one possibility of explaining. Well, one of the important things to recognize is that what we do know is, starting in 2002, Mayor Giuliani, that these voting vendors, it was brought out in one of the Diebold manuals, have a feature called the weighted race feature. The weighted race feature, it's a documented feature. And the weighted race feature is basically says that the feature in the software, which the secretaries of state have certified knowingly or maybe unconsciously, but they must have certified these electronic voting system software, has a feature called the weighted race feature, which allows a voter's vote to be, or a candidate's votes to be multiplied. So what that means is the central principle that Justice Earl Warren ruled on in 1964, one person, one vote, or clarified that, can be violated. It can be one person, not one vote. And that is one explanation of this. But the important feature I think people in the public need to understand is these software systems, the electronic voting software systems, have a documented feature called the weighted race feature. So the implementation of this is very possible. In fact, it's a documented feature starting as early as 2002.
Is there any reason for that? Any legitimate reason? Don't you want to count every? Don't you want to count every vote as one?
Every vote should be counted as one vote, but the fact that a weighted race feature exists should be of serious concern to all of America, because it basically means that all of us have been going, we're going back to Dred Scott, where it means that all of us, in some ways, the ubiquity of unfairness, where at that time it was 3/5 of a vote, where we could all become 1/3 of a vote. In this case, the people who voted for President Trump approximately were becoming 7/10 of a vote.
Do you know if the Dominion machines have that weighted vote feature?
As I understand, they do have this feature. And remember, the more important thing to also understand is our votes are stored not as whole integer numbers, but as decimal fractions, which means when you get a vote, if a candidate gets 100 votes, it's not stored as 100, it's 100.0215, which is also quite alarming, which means if the fact that the votes are stored as decimal fractions means you could have external programs intersect, communicate with those programs and alter them using external software programs, which could also do weighted race features. But the important element here is that there's documented features of the weighted race feature as early as 2002, and our votes are stored as decimal numbers.
Would I be overly simplistic if I concluded the only reason you would want a machine with a weighted vote feature is in order to cheat?
It's enabling cheating. It's an enabling of one person, not one vote.
I mean, this is not a poll.
That's what the feature enables.
This is not a poll. This is an absolute vote. And the only reason to have that feature would be if you're going to distort the vote.
Exactly.
Wow. Do you know what a Monte Carlo is?
Excuse me, Mayor Giuliani?
Did you do a Monte Carlo where you can do millions of possibilities in a minute to find a good match?
Yes, so that's what this is doing. There are many different techniques. The solver technique here, there are many different numerical methods, but essentially it's doing one of those kinds of approaches to find that fit. Exactly.
And that's how you arrived at the one that you felt was the closest.
Yes.
And could you say with a degree of professional certainty that there's no question that this vote count in Arizona is faulty, false, not accurate, whatever words are comfortable?
Well, I think what I can say is that the plausibility of that, the cumulative vote count as we see it progress is highly implausible. The caveat being we don't have certain data on the, what percentage of demographics of independent voters, but from everything we've run and the simulations we've run, it's highly implausible the pattern of voting we saw that was reported by the Secretary of State of Arizona in Maricopa County.
Thank you, Doctor. Thank you very much.